Okay, so we finished up the bowls, and as you may recall from reading about the bowls in chapter 16, is um, that takes us up to the end of the Great Tribulation, right? So that's everything. So that means the chapter we're coming up on now, well, chapter 17 and 18 that we're coming up on now, are parentheticals. In other words, one of the angels with the bowls tells John, as we will read, okay, come over here. I'm going to show you about the destruction of Babylon and how that happens. So John's going to get changed and rewound backwards to where he can back up a little bit to where the destruction of Babylon starts happening. And he's going to get to see how all that plays out. So we need to review a little bit because there's some confusing and confounding parts concerning Babylon. So we'll also look a little bit at chapter 13. So just to kind of run over and review, because I don't want to rush. I want to make sure we are getting this material, that we understand it as best as anybody can understand it. And so I'm gonna back up here a little bit and run over some thoughts and review a little bit because it's been a couple of weeks. It's been several weeks since chapter 13. So let's take our time, take a run at this, and make sure we have a thorough understanding of where we've been and where we're going, so we can speak hopefully intelligently about Babylon and these chapters in Revelation. Because listen, if you can speak halfway intelligently to Babylon and what all that's about in the book of Revelation, you're way ahead of the game from even many Bible teachers. So put your thinking caps on, put your ears on, and then let's move forward a little bit and take a good look at this. So to back up to where we see this in Daniel, and Daniel is just a great go-to book to see where some of this starts, although we will go back and look a little bit at Genesis to where Babylon started, at Babel. But Daniel's vision in chapter 2, it begins with Babylon, as you remember, on the visage, the statue, people usually refer to it, the image, the head of gold, right? And the following nations as well were the order of historic nations that actually did exist, and they enslaved Israel as well, in that order given. There was Medo-Persia, that was the arms and the chest of silver. Now, Medo-Persia is because it's the Medes and the Persians, which is modern day Iran. Who knows who the Medes are today, what they're called today? Remember? The Medes are the Kurds. You've heard of the Kurds and some of the feuding going on between Iraq and the Kurds and things like that. So that's where they came from, Medo-Persia. That feud continues. So the belly and the thighs of bronze were Greece under Alexander the Great. Legs of iron, Rome. Legs because it ended up splitting east and west eventually. So these are actual countries, and those are the orders that where they came into power. And then following through are the feet mixed with iron and clay, Rome, and something else that doesn't mix well with 10 toes. And the 10 toes are like the 10 horns. So something Romish plays a role in the end, and yet Revelation doesn't explicitly mention Rome at all, but instead mentions Babylon. So is this a little bit confusing? Because why did it start off with this first statue here, and it talks about 2 legs of iron, and then we get into 2 feet of clay and iron and 10 toes, which all is like Rome. There's some Rome stuff going on there, but Rome isn't even really mentioned in the book of Revelation. Babylon is. It's a curious thing, right? So we contend again that what John records are not necessarily all these nations, um, yet the man of sin's earthly kingdom is like these kingdoms. So all these kingdoms aren't in play right now. When we get the man of sin, the Antichrist takes over, it's not like you're going to see resurrection of all these nations. What ends up happening is that this is typology, and so this final kingdom is like these ancient kingdoms in some respect. And very likely, you could go beyond that and say not only is, for instance, we've got Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, and it started even before that, a mighty kingdom, covered the civilized world at the time. And so it had for its day, global reach. I mean, it had a far reach. And then you've got for instance, Greece is a great one to look at because how swiftly Alexander the Great conquered the world, the civilized world at the time. And so clearly what's going on is there is something demonic with these leaders at the time, these different rulers. So it could be that, and it likely is, in the opinion of many, that the same chief demons, chief princes that were behind these nations conquering are going to be involved again. Probably all of them. Because look, one of the things they did is they went after Israel. That's one of the first things they tried to do is wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So clearly there's a satanic component going on here. So they're all anti-Yahweh, anything that's part of God's plans. They're going to try to destroy it. So they enslaved Israel. Some take these nations listed like the animals that John also recounted in reverse order, and they attempt to pin a geographical significance to the seven-headed beast because they say, look over here, you've got this nation came out of here and this nation came out of there, Medo-Persia, so it's got to come out of there, or Greece, and Greece did this, and so, the Antichrist is going to come out of this area. No, because in the typology, what he's doing is he is likening those nations and certain aspects of those nations to the area. We're not to look at those areas and say, hey, this is where the Antichrist is coming from. There's nothing in the text that even says that. So we don't want to get heavily into the geography. The closest we can come to the geography, we went over it before, and we're going to read some more verses tonight, but we know that this is of the earth, of the whole earth, right? So this is a global universal system, so it's the whole earth. Now, there's debate over where the seat is of power, or seats, maybe more than one, maybe more than one headquarters, who knows? So that's where you could really narrow down the debate if you want to, but you're not going to get where the Antichrist came from out of these passages. It's not the right way to read these passages at all. I think anything going in that direction is it's just misguided. So also, by way of review, because it comes up and opinions vary. There's an area here where I'm going to tell you right now that in these past few days and rereading and studying, I'm kind of looking at the 7 heads of the beast, and the scripture calls them 7 nations. I'm looking at that a little bit differently. And that is that, yes, you could figuratively say that since it's a global system, and I think it's okay to do that, since it's a global system, earthly kingdoms, and there are 7 continents, and we're also looking at the 7 hills. In the Greek, it's 7 mountains. You could say that the 7 continents are 7 mountains. But if I'm honest and I look at it and I reread all these passages over this past few weeks, I hope that you guys did, like the half a dozen different chapters that I sent your way to read. Um, in those examples, what we see, whether it's the statue, and it starts off with Babylon, works down to Medo-Persia, goes down to Greece, and so forth. And so it's successive kingdoms. So they're all in a timeline, and it's each successive kingdom. Even the animals, when they're listed, you've got the lion, you've got the bear, you've got the leopard. Okay, those are successive kingdoms in an order. So the 7 heads of the beast, or the 7 hills, I think the right way to look at them, keeping them in the same form of typology that the writers use, John uses, especially Daniel uses, is each hill is in the past its own successive kingdom. So that what we end up with by the time we get to the man of sin, the Antichrist, we get to his kingdom, that's the 7th head. And also, unlike a lot of the pictures that are used to portray, the beast, this kind of thing, like the woman rides the beast. And this one, when I pulled this one together, I didn't even bother messing with or looking at horns. But we read about 10 horns, right? Actually, when you're reading the whole thing, you read about 13 horns, and 3 are turned over to him, and the little horn rises up, and this kind of thing. And that's a big power play thing that happens. But anyway, what we're seeing with these horns is we're seeing these world powers, and 3 of them taking over, or being taken over, relinquishing their power. Actually, they give their power, their authority to the Antichrist. And we see 10 kings that are future. And so if you were to use the graphical imagery that a lot of people try to do with the pictures of the 10 horns, you're not going to have 2 horns on this head, 2 horns on this head, 1 horn on this head. It's not going to necessarily be that way, because what we see is we see these 10 horns on this 7-headed beast. It's all during the time of the man of sin, the Antichrist. So you should have 10 horns all on one head. Is the way the scriptures describe it. So we'll get into this. Let's look at this and see what it says. But
so you're saying that 6 of the heads are
past.
So kind of like this beast is one that's been building by evil regimes, and each evil regime kind of gets more global and more global and more global.
Right.
To where you get to the end, the beast, and then he has the 10 horns.
Do you remember this imagery here in this chart?
Yeah.
This is the same kind of thing, is that you have successive kingdoms in order. First was Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece, then Rome, and then revived Rome. And then you've got the animals in Daniel 7. So you've got like a lion, like a bear, like a leopard, and then you've got one that's exceedingly dreadful. So there's this typology here, are all things that are types that come into play. They're all part of, for Daniel's purposes, the angel was showing him their future. For John's perspective, he's looking back and it's already happened, it's already done. So now from John's perspective, he's saying, hey, you know how Babylon had this far-reaching thing, and they were just exceedingly powerful, and that was Babylon. Babylon fell, as read by those half a dozen chapters, hopefully, that Babylon fell, but it's yet to be destroyed utterly. And it'll be destroyed utterly, the scriptures say, in a few places, as you've probably read, where nobody will dwell there anymore, nobody will walk into it anymore, there'll be no music coming from it. Babylon right now is still there, and it's being rebuilt in some form, but it's a ghost of its former self. It's a shadow of its former self, but it's going to come back. Then there's Medo-Persia, and there's Greece, and the swift with which Greece came, and the mighty power of Rome and its destructiveness, and it just crushed everything in its way like a big iron machine, and crushed everything underfoot. So that's kind of what we're we're going to be looking at here, really. And that's why I want to kind of review some of these things, because I think they're.
So, and I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the statue, the Babylon, the animal.
Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And,
That is one side of the world. Satan has. There's a war between good and evil, and Satan has a kingdom that he's trying to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It started at,
Well,
and then on the far side or on the other side, the winning side,
is
the church. And you have this tug of war between the evil dominion in Babylon and all these always trying to kill them and take over, the church that ebbs and they ebb and flow. The church is persecuted, it grows, that sort of thing.
Well, now, because there was no church, obviously, until.
But it was always God's.
Anything that was God's plan or his design or anything he was ever trying to do, it seems like Satan has always been there trying to.
Even Greece. I mean, it's all God's will. Even Greece taking over made the New Testament. Their language was beautiful for the New Testament.
What Satan means for evil, God means for good. So yeah, Greece is a great example. Satan thinks, ha ha ha. Go back to Joseph. Joseph had his dream. Everybody's going to be bound down to him. Next thing you know, he's thrown down a pit, sold to slavery. Satan thinks, I'm going to take care of this. And next thing you know, he's in prison, meets some guys in prison who hook him up with the Pharisees. Says, hey, we know a guy that can probably interpret your dream. And then Joseph ends up being in charge and in exactly the position that the dream told him he was going to be in. So Satan had to have been Esther, same thing.
I'm just making the connection for myself and hopefully for
everyone
that it's these two regimes. Now, again, we know God is in control. I'm not saying they're equal in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But this revelation is the culmination of God taking his throne and he's the Lamb and killing Babylon, which is a kingdom that started way back in his head, these different heads throughout.
Well, I think it's not just. I feel strongly, and it's. You could say, yeah, it's just my opinion, but I'm taking John at his word in Revelation. It says Babylon, and I'm just going to say it means Babylon. A lot of people say Babylon, that's the United States. Yeah. Babylon, that's Europe. That's the 10-nation confederacy, and that's what the beast is the 10-nation confederacy. A lot of people have made some great arguments. And the 10-nation confederacy or the European Union or whatever form it takes in the future, or some Medo-Persian type of a Mediterranean type of organization, and they're trying to form one, and we could end up with both. It's going to happen. I don't doubt, but it's not the final formation. The final formation is going to be whoever's in charge of the UN, which is going to include the United States, going more and more in the direction of just bowing and knuckling under to the UN and their demands and going along with those things. And then whatever form the United Nations is and all those nations that are involved, with maybe some of the NATO nations or whatever, and then whatever Mediterranean type of a thing. There might even be an Eastern nations things. So we're going to end up with, somehow something's going to happen where you're going to end up with probably 3 kings in charge, right? And then they're going to all hand it over to the Antichrist, the little horn that comes up, surprise. So we're going to see that kind of a thing. So let's take a look at this, though. But I think there's nothing in the world right now that's the final formation of what we're going to see. And people keep trying to pull it out of newspapers. It's called newspaper exegesis, and it's easy to do. We should watch the news, and we should look for these things and say, ooh, that might mean something here, like Gog and Magog. When you see Putin and Erdogan and whoever the latest guy is going to be in charge of Iran, and you see these things, because that keeps changing. That's pretty dynamic, and Putin's health isn't great. But when you see these particular nations that are mentioned in the Gog and Magog war in Ezekiel 38, you got to say, ooh, what's going on there? Because the world wasn't always like that. It wasn't too long ago when Turkey was allies with us. It wasn't that long ago at all. It was like, late 90s, early 2000s even. and then see how things change. So it's important to watch the news for those things, but not take the newspaper and impose it on the scriptures. So, but now this thing of, so they represent nations. I really believe that. With respect to one of the heads being wounded, we have to remember that the beast is an entity, because the scripture does say he a lot. And a lot of people who I really like and respect will say that the head represents a nation and one of the nations is destroyed and discontinued. And so so it's healed and it comes back, kind of a thing. And I don't doubt that. A couple of these nations in the past, they even Rome wasn't, okay, and as we will read in Revelation 17, it is, and then then it's not, and then it comes back and it is again. That's true of Rome. In some fashion, you could say that of Babylon too, really, because Babylon was, and yeah, so when John was saying, "Hey, this," people will say that's Rome because John was living in the first century. John is saying, "Hey, it is, and then it's not going to be, and then it's going to come back." Well, when John's given the vision, and when he's describing what he's describing, and he's seeing what he's describing, was he describing his day, or was he describing the future world that he's looking at during Antichrist day? And he's saying, well, it wasn't, and it is, and it won't be. And he could have been talking about Babylon. See, so you can argue back and forth on that, but we know that there's some form of Rome that's going to come back because we have the miry clay and iron feet and toes. There's no getting around that from Daniel chapter 2. We're going to have Babylon because Babylon is named to death in the prophets, in the minor prophets, and in Revelation in particular. Does it really?
Both?
What's that now?
Can it be both?
I think it is, because we know it's global, right? We know it's global. So I think it's Rome in the sense of Rome's destructiveness. And so this is what we're looking at. That's kind of an interesting thing. But as far as the head being damaged, whether or not it's a person, I want to say that the beast is not uniquely a government entity, as some contend, but it's representative of both. So I think it really is both. The Bible makes frequent use of double meanings already. We've seen this. So double entendres. So by what precedent do we pick one or the other and say it's just this? So we're told both in terms of the context and the use of personal pronouns. Contrast with Nebuchadnezzar's vision in Daniel chapter 2. The giant image is an it. Although he's representing kingdoms. Even the visions of the four beasts in Daniel 7, they're called it. And not he. And yet Daniel sees eyes like that of a man and a mouth speaking pompous words. And in Revelation 13, we now change to these four beasts, except this time the beast is a singular beast, and the terms used are he and his. So suddenly now we've got he and his. Therefore, the dynamics change. In chapter 13, if you want to look at chapter 13 real quick, look at verse 2. The dragon gave him, so the dragon we know is Satan, right? You there in Revelation 13? Okay. The dragon gave him his power, his throne. So it's not just a government entity. Can an impersonal nation be given Satan's power and Satan's throne? Satan can act from there, but it's his power, and he can work out of there, but I don't know. It's debatable, right? Okay, look at verse 3. So we read in verse 3, one of the heads looks to be mortally wounded. I don't know that mortality is really say that about a nation. You could argue that. And the deadly wound was healed which could mean a mere nation if we stop right there, because the heads represent 7 nations, and it does say the head and not the horn. But then there's this, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. Why would the world marvel about a nation that looks to have been taken out, but then it comes back? I don't know about marvel. They'd be, oh, look at that, but I don't know about marveling. The result of this being that everyone worships the dragon and Satan as a result. So how do you do that just because a nation crumbled, struggled, stubbed its toe, and then came back up, and then, ooh, let's worship Satan now? But look at the following verses with odd language. Go down to verse 11 to 18. Note in verse 11, another beast, the false prophets indicated, okay? In verse 11, he causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. So he's causing people to worship the first beast, the beast itself, not just one of the heads. Notice that? Whose deadly wound was healed, and it's a whose. So he's not saying, go and worship. He doesn't put an image of a nation in the temple and say worship it. It's an image of the beast, which is a person. So that to me is very telling. You flip over to chapter 17. We really will start with verse 1, I promise, but I just feel like we need to review some of this. I'll have some great questions and things and some good points, but let's see if we can get it all in the right frame of mind here. Look at down at chapter 17, verse 9. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. So we're talking about Mystery Babylon, riding the coattails of the beast, the Antichrist, whatever the religious system is riding the coattails of the Antichrist. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. So notice the context there are about kings, and these are kings, and I think rightly speaking of kings of the past. Just as I said, so the 7 hills, the 7 heads are kingdoms from the past. So 5 have fallen, 1 is, and it's contended that would be Rome, because 1 is during John's day, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, which this is the Antichrist, he's the last king, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7 who is going into perdition. Now, how is the beast that was and is not, how is he the 7th and the 8th at the same time? Well, because it's like a satanic split personality, right? He is the 7th one, the 7th head, his kingdom, but he's also the 8th because it's Satan himself indwelling the Antichrist. So we've got this going on where you could say it's the merging of 2 kingdoms. You got Satan's kingdom here merging with the 7th final earthly kingdom on the earth, and is going to perdition. Now, notice Antichrist is called the son of perdition, so it all fits with the Antichrist. So, Revelation 13 doesn't say the mortal wound is received by the Antichrist. It doesn't say that. We then must conclude another prophetic passage like Zechariah, which was written entirely about this time in history, is coincidental, if you believe in biblical coincidences, which I don't. Remember, that was in Zechariah 11. In Zechariah 11, verses 15 to 17, it says, "And the Lord said to me, take again for yourself the equipment of a foolish shepherd. For I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for the perishing, seek the scattered, heal the broken, or provide for the one who is exhausted, but will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hoofs." Verse 17, "Woe to the worthless or idle idol, not idol as in like a car sitting and idling, but like an idol as in idol worshiping. Woe to this worthless idol shepherd who abandons the flock. A sword will be on his arm and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered and his right eye will be blind. You'd be hard pressed to come up with some type of a simile or a word picture that makes this reasonably fit as a nation, as a kingdom. Because eyes, sometimes people will say, well, eye has to do with vision, has to do with wisdom, being able to see, right? And an arm has to do with strength. Okay, so this country is going to, it's supposed to be a mortal wound, but yet wisdom is cut kind of in half. Or if the right arm is strength, the nation is kind of, the nation's strength is cut in half. Well, then why have the whole world marveled? Because it's like, ooh, they took a good hit there, but not completely wiped out and came back from a mortal wound. See what I'm saying? It fits as a person, does not fit as a nation. So you could say both, perhaps, if you want to, but I got to say, at a minimum, you got to say that, no, something's going to happen to the Antichrist. Otherwise, you can't even go back in history, and I've searched high and low in commentaries, where was there a historic character, some great king somewhere, who this happened to of note? And I couldn't find anything, and I couldn't find any commentary that said, oh, this is like this king here. Nobody does that. So I think that's intriguing. That says something too. So if some acknowledging this is Antichrist will not say the sword in the arm, his right eye is strength and intelligence, I can say that applies to a person, but it doesn't really, the worthless shepherd doesn't really fit a land. And it doesn't really fit the context of what Zechariah is talking about either in that passage. But I invite you to read, when you get a chance, again, Zechariah 11, and read that passage and what the flow is, and it doesn't fit with declaring that as a nation. So, so then they worship the Antichrist. They're worshiping the dragon. What else does it say down here? Again, as we'll see, many wonderful Bible teachers will point out the 10 horns are indeed rulers, kings. But we'll go back to Rome. Some people will try to, that's another thing I was going to bring up, another thing I read. Some people will try to go back to Rome and say the 10 horns and having to do with Rome. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it all about Rome and maybe the EU or something like that. Because they'll go to Rome and they'll try to count the kings. Because, when you look at the kings of these nations, like Babylon, was Nebuchadnezzar. And you know that in Greece was Alexander the Great. So you know who these different kings are. But when you say Rome, was various Caesars, right? Various leaders. It's like in the United States. It's not just one president. It wasn't just George Washington ran the United States. It's a succession. Well, they'll go in and they'll try to break down these Caesars or Rome and make 10 out of them. So that's really trying to shoehorn into the passage what it doesn't say. So, and I think that's a mistake. We don't want to ever do that. And then you got a problem because these kings turn on the woman, the harlot, on the beast. And as we were discussing earlier, Laura brought up a great point, is if these are all kings of the past, how do these kings of the past rise up to fight the harlot, to devour her? Because that's what it says in verse 11 of chapter 17 of Revelation. So how do they devour the woman if these are kings from the past? So some of that just doesn't actually add up. So again, that's where we are, actual Babylon. Let's take a look at it, and you can decide. Any questions about that so far? Revisiting chapter 13 and delving into so here's this chart, and you don't need to spend a lot of time there, I don't think. But you can see that how it's a succession of several different kingdoms and their kings, and not really fitting that we should take the 7 heads of Revelation and try to make them all current kingdoms or one city like Rome. Some people, we've discussed this. There's several cities that are called the city on 7 hills, and some people try to take that and make it all about Rome. Oh, and we'll also sometimes, some people will try to take the city on 7 hills and the 10 horns, and they'll try to figure out how many popes there have been and which, that doesn't fit either. That's not being honest to the text at all. So without going into all the detail in history, just looking at the future, the prophecies about iron being Rome, the final variant will come out to be Roman Empire mixed with something miry or unstable. So there'll be something unstable. Daniel 2:42 says, "And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men. But they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay." So again, that's anyone's guess on that one. You just kind of take that coin, flip it up in the air, and have fun with that. But whatever it is that they are, they will not mix, they will not mingle with the seed of men. So these are something that's seed that is not of men. Something satanic, no doubt. Either way. Jeremiah 31 says, starting in verse 27, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and the seed of beast." So what does that mean? Is that some type of chimera or something? They're messing with genetics right now. But it says, God says he will do it. But the same way as Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38, Gog thinks it's his idea going against Israel, but God says, "I am leading you by the nose." So it could be something like that. And it will come to pass that as I have watched over them to pluck up, to break down, to throw down, to destroy, and to afflict, so I will watch over them to build and to plant, says the Lord. In those days they shall say no more, "The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. And everyone shall die for his own iniquity. Every man who eats the sour grapes, his teeth shall be set on edge." So, an interesting prophecy. So let's take a look a little bit more now about some of the history of Rome. Let's see here, which ones I want to do. We already saw, I'm not going to belabor this, we already saw where Babylon was mentioned in former passages so far in Revelation. In chapter 13, 14 it's mentioned, also chapter 16 it's mentioned. Let's look at the origin of Babylon a little bit here. Let's see what I can find. So, Babel, that means gate of God. But now it's synonymous with confusion, right? Babbling, or like the Tower of Babel. But their intent, gate of God, was that they were going to try to build a tower to heaven. And it was in the land of Shinar, that's an actual place, the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Euphrates comes up a lot, as we've discussed last time, in ancient Babylonia, which is now modern day Iraq. They said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city." So it's a prideful statement about the desire for man-centered glory. and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. So there's a false plan there of salvation, man trying to get to heaven on his own, get to God on his own. Let us make for ourselves a name. This is getting into Genesis 9 here, an attempt to defy humankind. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So they're talking about a rebellion. God had told them to fill the earth. So the Lord scattered them himself, scattered them abroad on the face of the whole earth. And thus his command is fulfilled. So stand fast now on your spells and in your many sorceries with which you have labored from your youth. Perhaps you will be able to profit. Perhaps you may cause trembling. You are wearied with your many counsels. Let now the astrologers, those who prophesy by the stars, those who predict by the new moons, stand up and save you from what will come to you. That's from Isaiah. So that's a condemnation because they're trying to soothsay their own future. Here's some images of ziggurats. A lot of people more and more these days are thinking that this is representative of probably what the Tower of Babel was like, because when they were scattered on the earth, all of a sudden all over the world we see examples of these. And here's some of the locations on this map of where they found various ziggurats, notable ones. So Nimrod was the first leader. In Genesis 10 we read, now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, or more like in defiance of the Lord, to resist the Lord. So it wasn't just like he was in front of the Lord. He was trying to stand up to the Lord. So therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. The name Nimrod means to rebel. He was Noah's great grandson. After Babel, Nimrod then expanded to Assyria, building Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin. The prophet Micah refers to Assyria as the land of Nimrod. That's in Micah 5:6. Nimrod, through his idolatry and military might, is a type of Antichrist who is to come. And also you may recall that one of the names for Antichrist is the king of Assyria. So again, there's this whole debate about where the Antichrist comes from, but we've gone over some of these maps, and you can outline some of these maps, whether it's Assyria, Rome, the Babylonian Empire, Greece. One of the things they all have in common, if you draw these lines around these territories, even the Persian Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire in particular, is that stuck within the borders of those is Israel, is Jerusalem. So they all have that in common, is they all overlap Jerusalem. At one time or another, Jerusalem was part of those empires and had Israel, had the Jews enslaved. So external sources state that Nimrod had a wife known as Semiramis, who founded the secret religious rites of the Babylonian mysteries. Semiramis had a son with an alleged miraculous conception. Does that sound familiar? Via a sunbeam. A sunbeam. Yeah, probably not the appliance. Who was given the name Tammuz. and is in effect was a false prophet, a false fulfillment of the promise of the seed of the woman given to Eve in Genesis 3:15. She also was known as the Queen of Heaven. And that's like, stop me if you've heard this, you know. So the linkages between Roman Catholicism, Tammuz was, I think that's celebrated around December 20th, and it would run for several days. So that's how you get Christmas on December 25th. And there's all kinds of religious symbolism that comes into Christmas, like even the Yule log and so forth, all came out of these traditions. So Babylonianism has also dramatically infiltrated, so-called Christian holidays and so forth. Easter, Ishtar, that's false gods of pagan worship and fertility. So various religious practices were observed in connection with this false Babylonian religion, including recognition of mother and child as God and of creating an order of virgins who became religious prostitutes. This is where the concept of nuns came about when Constantine became a Christian and he decided to convert some of these religions over. So they went from prostitutes to, okay, no more sex, or at least that you can talk about, right? It turned out a lot of that continued. But Tammuz, according to the tradition, was killed by a wild animal and then restored to life, a satanic anticipation, the counterfeit of Christ's resurrection. The mother origin of all false religions. The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead the dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and they pour out drink offerings to other gods in order to spite me. Is what the Lord says in Jeremiah 7:18. In Ezekiel 8:14, and he brought me to the entrance of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. So Semiramis was worshipped by offering a wafer to her. There were always 40 days of Lent, weeping for Tammuz, before the feast, which celebrated is a celebration of his supposed return. The worship of Semiramis also involved priests, sacramental rites, dedication of virgins, and so much more.
Tammuz was the sun.
Tammuz was the son, yeah. And Semiramis was the mother. And the father, I believe, was supposed to be Dagon. He was also called the Pontiff. He was the Pontiff of Dagon. He was a fish god.
Isn't that Jonah and what they so when the thing spit him back up, they were like, oh.
Yeah, we should listen to this guy, because it's fish god bottom. Now the hat that you see the Pope wear, it's a fish hat. Up like this, and it's got the fish mouth on top. So that's kind of awkward because it's a very ancient type of a garb that it's called the Pope, he's called the Pontiff. Awkward. So all of these come from one common type of a background, all the same type of a background. All goes back to Babylon. Here's a quote from MacArthur. People ask me all the time, do you think there are a lot of satanic religions around today? And I say, yes, every religion that is not Christianity is satanic, which is true. So again, we get into chapter 17 of Revelation. It says, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. Revelation 17:6. False religions have always persecuted God's people and still do so to this day, as we know. We also read, when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, and I saw beneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. It's in 6:9. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count, for every nation and all the tribes and people and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, these who are clothed in white robes, who are they, and where did they come from? And I said to him, my Lord, you know. And he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they have worshipped or washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Revelation 7:9, 13 to 14. Revelation 17, verses 15 to 16, it will also say this. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast. Oh, good. That carries her, which the 7 heads and the 10 horns, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are the peoples and the multitudes and nations and tongues. So often you'll see the seas, and the seas were no more, and they came out of the seas, or seas and waters is often Hebraic language that has to do with a sea of people. In fact, we've been known to use it in English in times in the past, but the seas of people. You look at a mass of people and everybody's heads are moving and things like that. It looks kind of like the glitter on the waves and things. So you talk about a bunch of people, and people will refer to them as the seas. So he's telling us now that he came out of the seas of people from all nations. And the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. So this has got to be future kings here are in question, because again, past kings can't come up and do that because she's still in our future. So Babylon's false religion has been infected. It's infected the whole world and its peoples. No place is immune. Although the political system was using the false religion for its own purposes, it will eventually turn and destroy it. Satan's kingdom becomes divided. And I will say that this is true too of Rome. This is another way it might be kind of like Rome. Rome fell. Rome's scope, its size was so huge it was becoming untenable. Send troops out on horseback or whatever to go into England and Britain, into those places, and all the way down into North Africa, out east, to try to collect taxes to maintain the kingdom was getting to be. So why not, with the change with Emperor Constantine and following emperors, now you've got where you don't have to have by military might enforcing people and saying hand over your money anymore. Now you make it part of a religious system to where your loved one might not be in heaven. They might be in purgatory waiting for you, but if you give us enough money, we'll give it to the priest and they might pray your loved ones out of purgatory and into heaven. So you make this ritual. You don't want them. Where's that in the Bible? You don't find it in the Bible. Well, okay, so let's keep people from reading the Bible. We'll keep the Bible in Latin, which is a dying language. We won't teach people how to. Let's keep them ignorant. They got to go to their priest. So now you turn this religious system, this government system of the old Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Church, and you've converted everything over to where now you got people willingly handing their money over and giving them to priests. The priests collect the money, and then things go over that way. So you don't have to have enforcers now necessarily to do that. It's ingenious and evil. So that's how that whole system happened. So Rome never did really quite go entirely away, did it? It's still kind of here. It fell governmentally, but it morphed into something else. Similar with Babylon. It fell, but we now inculcated into the Holy Roman Catholic Church, quote unquote, is all this Babylonian religion. See how that works? It's all mushed together. Maybe that's, some of the feet of clay and iron, except I don't know what the beast is and the seed of man and the seed of, I don't know how that works. We won't be around for that, but that sounds horrific. But so although the political system was using the false religion for its own purposes, it will eventually turn and destroy it. Satan's kingdom becomes divided. The Antichrist will do away with all religion and instead demand the world worship him. So he's going to stand up in the temple at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. So you'll see everybody will turn on the Mystery Babylon system as well. So here's a contrast of the bride and the harlot. So Jesus Christ, you've got a pure bride, that's his church. And Jesus loves his church, and he died for and saves his bride. The Antichrist, on the other hand, he's got a harlot, this false religious system, Semiramis, Diana, Queen of Heaven. He hates his harlot, and he kills and destroys his harlot. So, of course, couldn't happen to a nicer person. The ending of false religion. For God, in Revelation 17:17 says, for God has put it in their hearts to execute his purposes by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast, and the words of God will be fulfilled. So the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So it's a city, but it's not just a city. It's reigning over the whole earth. So there might be one city where it all comes from, but here's some of the influence that we've seen at, Wall Street, where they put their money, the advertisers, and we see their advertisers at Madison Avenue. That's where the advertising hub is. We've seen their commercials and all the rainbow stuff. Wall Street's willing to fund it and make money off of it. Las Vegas, and you could put another one in here, and that would be the Hollywood sign. And that's where most of it predominantly comes from. So in this same way, this great city of Babylon is going to have an influence over the whole world, far-reaching over the whole world. So, behold, I'm going to stir up the Medes against them. This is from Isaiah 13. You probably read this. Who will not value silver or take pleasure in gold, and their bows will mow down the young men. They will not even have compassion on the fruit of the womb, in other words, babies, nor will their eye pity children. And Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. So Babylon has fallen, but it's never been destroyed until here. Now here it says God is going to send the Medes, I guess the Kurds, against them. We do hear about a kingdom from the north. So here it describes who's coming from the north and whoever's funding the Medes. The Medes will probably be, a proxy type of a nation to attack because they've been enemies a long time. It's kind of like, how Iran will use Hezbollah and that kind of a thing. So we do read a couple times in the scripture about Babylon being destroyed from the north. Now, if Babylon's the United States, does that mean the United States is going to be destroyed by Canada? There's kind of a problem there with that, which is kind of could be comical. Jeremiah 25. Then it will be when 70 years are completed. This is speaking pasture. But notice, as often happens with Jeremiah, but really, really a lot with Isaiah, these prophecies will start off old world, real time, and then make a prophetic leap in the future, something that never happened in history. So, so that's the Jewish captivity in Babylon. I will punish the kings of Babylon and that nation, declares the Lord, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it an everlasting desolation. That didn't happen, did it? But it will become an everlasting desolation, but it's not yet. So we're going to wrap it up before we go on really any further with Here's a question. Are the events in chapter 17 and 18 referencing the same Babylon or not? Because there's the debate is that some people will say that there's a spiritual Babylon, or in other words, a religious system, and there's a governmental one. So that is the question you ask yourself. So when we pick this up next time, we are going to get through it, but we wanted to review all the stuff on Babylon's history before we went any further. Hopefully you've read that, Isaiah 13 and 14, Jeremiah 50 and 51, and Revelation 17 and 18. And you're welcome to raise those questions. We can discuss some of that now that you've read, but we're going to get earnestly into now and try to unwind and comprehend Revelation chapter 17 and 18 and what's supposed to happen as best we can with the information that we have. Any questions or comments so far on history or anything?
Never connected Babel with Babylon.
Is that right? Yeah. We can definitely, because I mean, you're probably right not to, because a lot of times people will connect things because they sound the same as something in English that's been translated. People often will do that with, Gog and Magog war in some of those nations like Rosh. When they say Rosh, that sounds like Russia. Oh, Rosh is talking about Russia. Well, Rosh just means Rosh. When you translate it, it means head. It has nothing to do with Russia, but it sounds the same. So people go, Rosh, that's Russia. So you're not off the mark by saying Babel doesn't necessarily mean Babylon, but in this case it does, because it goes back to their first king, and he was Nimrod of Babel. Anything else? We're going to wait till next time. We'll try to wrap this up with Babel. Because to me, we're getting to the exciting part, and that's when everything wraps up, the whole Christ comes back, second coming thing, and then starts setting up his kingdom. And that's the part that I'm really looking forward to, because that, to me, is fascinating how all that comes together, the path he takes, what he does, and the sheep and goats judgment and all those kinds of things fascinate me. So I'm anxious to, it's interesting to see what's going on in chapter 17 and 18 with Babylon, but I'm really looking forward to getting through that. There's some more insights in here that have to do with the timing of when during the bowls this happens. Yeah, I think the scripture kind of shows us if we pay attention. If you're careful and you read half of one of those verses in there, it kind of tells you how far in that happens. And I'll just drop that hint, and we'll talk about it next week. All right? All right, thanks.